Dr. Samuel Valdez had performed 3,247 surgeries without a single tremor until Tuesday. The moment arrived at 2:47 p.m., 17 minutes into what should have been a routine mitral valve repair. Mrs. Chen lay open on the table, her heart exposed and temporarily still when Samuel felt it. A microscopic earthquake in his left index finger. Just a whisper of movement, barely perceptible, but in a world measured in millimeters, whispers could kill. He froze. The surgical suite hummed with mechanical precision around him, the rhythmic wheeze of the ventilator, the electronic beeping of monitors, the soft shuffle of nurses anticipating his next move. Everyone waited. Everyone watched. And Samuel's hands, those legendary hands that had been featured in medical journals, that had never failed him, betrayed him with another tremor. "Doctor?" The scrub nurse's voice carried a note of concern. Samuel's throat constricted. In his peripheral vision, he caught the resident's eyes above her mask, alert and questioning. The anesthesiologist glanced up from his monitors. Time stretched like taffy, each second heavy with the weight of 3 decades of flawless reputation. "Continuing," he managed, forcing his voice to remain steady while his world tilted off its axis. He completed the surgery, successfully, of course. Mrs. Chen would recover fully, add years to her life, dance at her granddaughter's wedding. But as Samuel stripped off his gloves in the scrub room afterward, he noticed his hands were shaking again, this time not from mysterious neurological misfiring, but from pure, undiluted terror. The tests came back 3 weeks later. Essential tremor, they called it. Essential, as if there was something fundamental about the way his hands now betrayed him at unpredictable moments. Progressive, but manageable. The neurologist explained with the kind of clinical detachment Samuel had once wielded himself, not life-threatening, merely career-ending. "You could consider other specialties," Dr. Morrison suggested during their meeting, her words landing like stones in still water. "Administration, perhaps. Teaching." Teaching. The word tasted bitter, like failure dressed up in academic robes. Samuel had spent 6 months fighting it, researching treatments, adjusting medications, practicing sutures until his fingers cramped. But the tremors persisted, arriving without warning, turning his once steady hands into unreliable instruments. The morning he caught himself hesitating before making an incision, he knew it was over. The University of Chicago Medical School's lecture hall felt cavernous compared to the intimate theater of the operating room. 43 first-year students stared up at him with eager faces, notebooks poised, ready to absorb whatever wisdom the great Dr. Valdez would impart. If only they knew, Samuel thought, that their professor was a surgeon who could no longer operate, a master craftsman whose tools had turned against him. "Today we'll discuss the fundamentals of cardiac surgery," he began, his voice echoing off the walls. The words felt hollow, theoretical. How could he teach what he could no longer do? A student in the 3rd row raised her hand. "Dr. Valdez, what was your most challenging case?" Samuel's mind flashed to Mrs. Chen, to that moment when everything changed. Instead, he launched into a sanitized version of a complex transplant from years ago, hitting all the technical points while carefully omitting the doubt, the fear, the weight of holding someone's life in your hands. The students took notes dutifully, but he could see it in their eyes, the disconnect between textbook knowledge and lived experience. They were learning facts, not wisdom. Weeks passed in this strange new rhythm. Samuel would stand before classes, dispensing information like a medical Wikipedia, while inside him something withered. He missed the immediacy of the OR, the high-stakes ballet of life and death, the profound satisfaction of fixing what was broken. Teaching felt like describing color to the blind. Then came the afternoon that changed everything. David Kim, a particularly intense second-year student, lingered after class. His usual confident demeanor had cracked, revealing something raw underneath. "Dr. Valdez," David began, his voice barely above a whisper, "I need to tell you something. Yesterday, in the skills lab, I couldn't get the sutures right. My hands kept shaking. Everyone else seemed so steady, so confident. I'm terrified I'm not cut out for this." Samuel felt something shift inside his chest. Here was a young man drowning in the same sea of perfectionism that had once buoyed Samuel's ego but now threatened to claim another victim. The careful walls Samuel had built around his vulnerability began to crack. "David," Samuel said slowly, "may I show you something?" He held out his hands, palm down. As if summoned by his permission, a tremor rippled through his fingers, subtle but unmistakable. David's eyes widened. "I haven't operated in 8 months," Samuel continued, his voice gaining strength from this unprecedented honesty. "These hands, which once never failed me, now shake at the worst possible moments. I thought it meant I was finished, washed up, useless." The silence stretched between them, heavy with possibility. "But here's what I'm learning, David. Perhaps our imperfections aren't bugs in the system. They're features. They connect us to our humanity, to our patients' fears, to the humility that makes us better doctors." David's shoulders relaxed slightly. "You mean, it's okay to be scared?" "It's okay to be human," Samuel replied. "The question isn't whether you'll face moments of uncertainty or physical limitation. The question is what you'll do with them." That evening, Samuel found himself standing in his study, staring at the wall of awards and accolades that had once defined his worth. For the first time in months, he felt something other than loss. He felt possibility. The next morning, he walked into the lecture hall with a different energy. Instead of launching into his prepared material, he began with a question that surprised even him. "How many of you have ever failed at something important?" Every hand in the room went up, slowly, hesitantly. "Good," Samuel said, his voice carrying a warmth that hadn't been there before. "Because today, I want to tell you about the most important failure of my career and how it taught me what I should have learned decades ago." He told them about Mrs. Chen, about the tremor, about the months of denial and shame. He showed them his hands, steady now in this moment of truth. He watched their faces transform from polite attention to genuine engagement, saw them lean forward as if drawn by invisible threads. "The surgeon I was before," Samuel continued, "was technically excellent but emotionally disconnected. I thought perfection was the goal, that vulnerability was weakness. I was wrong." A student in the front row, Sarah, he remembered, raised her hand tentatively. "Dr. Valdez, how do we learn to be okay with not being perfect?" Samuel smiled, feeling something he hadn't experienced in years. The profound satisfaction of teaching something that mattered. "By practicing compassion," he said, "first with ourselves, then with our patients. By remembering that the people we treat aren't looking for gods in white coats, they're looking for healers who understand what it means to be human." As the weeks passed, Samuel noticed the change in his classroom. Students began sharing their own struggles, their fears, their moments of doubt. The sterile environment of medical education became something richer, more authentic. They weren't just learning procedures. They were learning to be physicians who could sit with uncertainty, who could offer presence alongside expertise. One morning, Samuel received an email from David Kim. "Dr. Valdez, I wanted you to know that I had my first patient interaction yesterday." An elderly man was terrified about his upcoming surgery. Instead of just giving him statistics, I told him it was okay to be scared, that I was scared too when I first started. He thanked me for being honest. "I think I understand now what you meant about imperfection being a feature, not a bug." Samuel read the email twice, then looked at his hands. They were steady now, not because the tremor had disappeared, it hadn't, but because he had found a different kind of precision. Not the mechanical perfection of surgery, but the delicate art of meeting another human being in their vulnerability and saying, "You are not alone." That afternoon, as he prepared for his next lecture, Samuel realized something profound. He had spent 30 years as a surgeon, touching thousands of hearts with his hands. But in these few months as a teacher, he had touched just as many hearts with his story, and perhaps in some ways had healed more than he ever had in the operating room. The tremor in his hands had not been the end of his calling, it had been the beginning of a deeper one.